Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace or do they have more sinister motives? Join your host, Mad Mark, as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that have puzzled mankind for centuries on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode: when the gods took to the battlefield, and when Marduk rewrote the Old Testament.
That son of a bitch!
Yes, we're finally going to just touch on that a little, as I've promised many times. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. I'm Mad Mark, and today we will begin our studies of Zecharia Sitchin's third book, The Wars of Gods and Men, published by Avon Books in 1985. You know, everyone has heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Accidentally discovered in 1947 by a shepherd boy on the cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. Well, for the sake of time, I'm not going into all of the scrolls that were discovered there. But one of the longest and most complete scrolls deals with a future war, a final war, if you will. Scholars have labeled it the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. And in this war, which supposedly will be located in the Middle East, the God of Israel, or Marduk, will take an active role. In one of the scroll's verses, we read, "On the day the Chetains fall, there shall be mighty combat and carnage in the presence of the God of Israel," as I said, otherwise known as Marduk. Now, of course, all war literature is partial, depending on which side you're on. I find it interesting that whoever wrote this scroll depicted Marduk's side as the Sons of Light. Once we delve into the history and the various acts of Marduk, you will see that he is anything but a representative of the light. I find all that rather ironic. But this notion that a god will actually appear on the battlefield to fight side by side with humans might sound a bit far-fetched, like something we might read in a fiction novel or perhaps a comic book. I mean, throughout history, we have read countless tales of kings who claim to have gone to war for their god. And most people would write that notion off as fantasy. But it's not actually as delusional as you might think.
Are you sure?
Yes. The Greek pantheon of gods, for example, often started aggressions and fought in wars with humans. But of course, that was simply mythology, right? I find it fascinating that over the past 2,000 years or so, ever since the belief in one true God took hold and spread throughout most of the world, these pantheons of ancient gods have been relegated to the category of legends and myths, when, as I have shown on this podcast and will continue to reveal, it is the one true God belief that is the fallacy. But I digress. Let's continue. First, let's understand a few things. The question often arises, did the Anunnaki believe in a higher power? And the answer to that is yes. They didn't worship it as many humans worship their God, but they did believe that it often interacted with them through the events of their lives and gave them guidance in dreams. I will cover this in more detail on future episodes. Another thing that I would like to clarify, and I cannot emphasize this enough, there are many instances of Anunnaki behavior that may be difficult for many people to understand. As I have learned through my readings and research over the course of my life, we humans are similar to the Anunnaki in our various behaviors and mannerisms, and vice versa, but never exactly the same. There are many times where the Anunnaki will do something that seems commonplace to them, but will leave you and I simply scratching our heads in disbelief. Another item to clarify is that the Anunnaki are indeed a warrior race. There were wars on their planet Nibiru before the first Anunnaki ever landed here on Earth. One of those wars almost destroyed them completely.
Holy shit.
And we will learn more about that as time goes by. So it should be no surprise to learn that the Anunnaki also fought amongst themselves right here on Earth, because that is their nature. And one final point I wish to make is that the Anunnaki went by different names at different times and locations throughout history. I've hit on this before. Some of these name changes were of their own doing, and it's just their way. I've given up trying to understand why they do it. It seems very confusing to me. As I said earlier, they have certain behaviors that are difficult for we humans to understand. But another reason for the name changes might be the result of human intervention throughout time. So keep that in mind as well. One final note here regarding the various gods involved in the wars that we will be examining in this book. Mr. Sitchin prefers to use the names utilized by the various source materials for each Anunnaki god. In my view, that is very confusing. So I will attempt to clarify exactly which gods are being referred to by using both their more popular, well-known name and then the name in the individual texts, as I did on past episodes concerning Zecharia Noah, for example. Now, as I stated in the last episode, many of these wars stemmed from the fact that the Anunnaki were very territorial and protective of their lands, and as time passed, they produced offspring. These children wanted lands of their own to rule over, and then eventually there were grandchildren, and, well, you see where this is all going. And the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Nothing is ever enough. Power goes to people's heads. It's just your same old freaking story. And since it is always the same old freaking story, it really makes me wonder if the same thing isn't going on now that was going on then. Are the Anunnaki still in charge of our fates? They are still here, after all. Their need for gold in order to keep their planet's atmosphere in place is an ongoing struggle, so they're never going to go away. Are there other places in the solar system where gold can be found and mined? Yes, of course, but it's not as easily obtainable as it is here. One such place would be the asteroid belt. Remember when I told the story of the creation of Earth, how the planet Tiamat was struck by Nibiru, resulting in the creation of the planet Earth and the asteroid belt? Then logically, if there is gold here, then there is gold there as well. But mining asteroids would be an extremely difficult task, even for the Anunnaki. So, as long as it is easily obtainable here, why look elsewhere? And we know that they're still here because their crafts are spotted all the time. While it is almost a certainty that there are not nearly as many Anunnaki on Earth now as there once was, I contest that they are still very instrumental in the goings-on here on Earth. Why? Because it is beneficial to them to do so. Okay, time to return to the text. One of the most romanticized wars in history was undoubtedly the war that launched 1,000 ships, the Trojan War. Relayed to us by the Greek storyteller Homer.
Go nuts.
Not that Homer. In his story entitled The Iliad, in this account of the war, Homer, again, different Homer, blamed the gods for not only starting this war, but also for turning it into such a major conflict. And behind it all was Jove, or Zeus, otherwise known as Enlil. In this case, I can see why Enlil chose to go by a different name. I mean, the bad press from the Great Flood incident was probably killing him. Burn! 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 But even before the battle had begun, it was the god Apollo who made the first violent act. And who was Apollo? Shamash Utu, the grandson of Enlil. The Iliad tells us that he sat himself down away from the ships with a face as dark as night, and his silver bow rang death as he shot his arrows into the midst of the Achaeans. For 9 days he shot his arrows among the people. What was this weapon that Apollo Shamash Utu was utilizing? My guess would be some sort of a grenade or rocket launcher. Finally, the war begins, and we read that Minerva, the sister of Apollo Shamash Utu, otherwise known as Inanna Ishtar, shot through the sky as a brilliant meteor, a fiery train of light. And later on, to prevent the fighting from stopping for the evening, she lit up the battlefield, turning night into day. How did she accomplish that? I'm assuming it was some sort of high-powered LED floodlight technology. As the battle raged on below, the gods continued their limited participation from the air by assisting the various combatants as needed. But when the gods on opposing sides began to actually hurt each other, Enlil Zeus put a stop to their participation in this human battle. But that didn't last long either, because many of the human warriors were actually the sons of many of these gods or goddesses by human mates. So it was difficult for them to resist getting more involved. Eventually, Enlil Zeus declared, "For my own part, I shall stay here, seated on Mount Olympus, and look on in peace. But you others, do go among the Trojans and Achaeans and help either side as you might be disposed." You know, I find it interesting that this battle, as famous as it is, was long thought of to be simply a Greek legend. Here we go again, that mentality that there's just one God and so any other belief has to be simply mythology. Basically, we have been believing this lie for over 2,000 years. It's been handed down from parents to their children, from generation to generation, for so long now that it's just become our truth. And the belief that tales of many gods are just make-believe stories, well, how pious and pompous have we become? Thinking that we've gotten it right and that ancient history was wrong. I can't wait to get to the wars that eventually led to that belief, but for now, let's continue on. Getting back to the Trojan War, you know, in 1870, Heinrich Schliemann discovered the site of Troy and the fact that it actually did exist, and that this ancient war actually did take place just as Homer wrote it.
Hey, Homer was right.
You bet he was. The Battle of Troy in the 13th century BC, where humans and gods fought side by side. But let's move on to another example. The Achaeans, who fought the Trojans in that war, also had many battles with the Hittites through the years. Remember the Hittites?
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
I spoke of them briefly a few episodes back. They were referenced many times in the Old Testament of the Bible. An Indo-European people from the area we now know as Turkey. They were known for their military prowess and flourished circa 1750 BC. For centuries prior to the War of Troy, the Hittites expanded their kingdom to imperial proportions, and claimed to have done so upon the orders of their supreme god Teshub-Ishkur, son of Nana, grandson of Enlil. Hittite history speaks of many battles where Teshub-Ishkur led their armies into battle. And who else joined in these clashes, fighting side by side with Teshub-Ishkur? None other than Inanna Ishtar once again. Hey gang, Mad Mark here to let you know that I now have new t-shirts available for my show, Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. You can find these cool new shirts by searching Who Are the Aliens shirts on Amazon or by clicking the link on my website at madmarktv.com. They are available in a variety of sizes and colors with delivery through Amazon, a name you know and trust. That's the all-new Who Are the Aliens t-shirts, just like the one you see me wearing right here. Get yours now. It was to her divine power that many a victory was attributed, as she came down from the skies to smite the hostile countries. Now, the Hittite influence extended all the way south into Canaan, but they were there as settlers, not conquerors. Hittite texts tell us that they only went to war on the command of their gods, and that their enemies were always offered a chance to surrender peacefully before any hostilities began. Another interesting note is that they were always satisfied to receive tributes and captives from the lands that they conquered. The cities were never destroyed, and the citizens were not massacred. The flip side of that coin were the Egyptians. They repeatedly sought to extend their rule northward into Canaan, and finally succeeded in doing so when Thutmose III was victorious at the Battle of Megiddo. In his inscriptions regarding the war, Pharaoh Thutmose III wrote that we plundered towns and laid encampments to waste. I desolated his towns, set fire to his encampments. Their resettlement can never take place. All the people captured have been made prisoners. Their countless cattle I carried off, and their goods as well. I took away every resource of life. I cut down their grain and felled all their groves and all their pleasant trees. I totally destroyed it.
You dick!
Now, I realize that is a rather lengthy speech, but I felt it relevant to include it all because not only do I want you to realize the full extent of the horrors committed by this Pharaoh Thutmose III to the Canaanites, but I also want you to understand why this was done, because it was all carried out on the orders of his god, Amun-Ra. Now, you can spell this god's name any way you want. A-M-O-N, A-M-U-N, A-M-E-N. It's all the same Anunnaki. And that Anunnaki god is and was Marduk. And this is a perfect example of Marduk's personality and behavior. I've touched on this before, and it will come up many more times on this show in the future. Marduk is a key figure in this ongoing quest to discover the truth, and I believe his influence is still being felt to this day. And one of those ways his influence is still being felt is when many people on this earth pray. Yes, I said pray. What word do all of the Abrahamic faiths, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, use at the end of their prayers or as an affirmation of a prayer? Amen or Amen. I remember as a kid asking my father why we said Amen at the end of our prayers. It never made sense to me. What did it mean? Why not say Ah women? It was another of those religious mysteries that nobody I asked ever had an answer for. Either that, or they would concoct some BS answer that made no sense either. But a few years ago, I Googled it. So let's take a look at what Google has to say. In Hebrew, Amen means certainty or truth. And in all three of these faiths, it is used to signify agreement or affirmation of the truth. But why that word? Looking into it a bit further, we find that it was not always in the Hebrew vocabulary. Indeed, it did not even exist until circa 400 BC. But Israel has existed since 1000 BC. What would have made them start using that word out of the blue after 600 years of existence? Well, let's see if we can figure this out. What could have happened between 1000 BC and 400 BC that would account for the creation of this new word? Ah, yes, that's right. Babylon, under the leadership of King Nebuchadnezzar II, invaded and conquered Judah, or Israel, in the year 587 BC. And I just wonder who the god of the Babylonians was at that time. Can you guess? It was none other than our old friend, pardon my pun, Marduk, Amun-Ra himself. I will cover all of this in much more detail down the road, but within roughly 170 years of conquering Israel, suddenly the word Amen is created to signify truth and agreement, and it begins showing up in Jewish religious texts at the end of prayers or used in agreement with a prayer. I just thought you might like to know that little fact. That every time you conclude a prayer with the word Amen, you are giving praise to this evil, narcissistic, arrogant, cruel, selfish being. And now you know.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
Remember his famous words in the Bible? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Nope, nothing narcissistic about that statement. And what is it about narcissists that they always seem to have to convince everybody that whatever they say is the truth and everybody else is lying? Marduk created a new word around his name, Amen, and gave it the definition of truth and agreement. Sounds like something Hitler would have done. And you know, these guys always seem to go after the media for calling them out, don't they? But of course, there was no media in 400 BC. So, what the hell? We'll just create a new word that just happens to be another name for this conquering god Marduk, and we'll stick it in at the end of everyone's prayers in order to show truth and agreement with this new narcissistic god. Of course, that wasn't the only changes that Marduk made to the Jewish faith. In fact, that's probably why it took him 170 years before he found the time to create Amen. He was far too busy rewriting the Jewish texts.
You dick.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'll cover this all in more detail in an upcoming episode, but let me give you just a taste of what's coming. You've all heard of Abraham, right? Of course you have. He's the reason that we call Judaism, Christianity, and Islam the Abrahamic faiths. He was the father of Judaism. But have any of you believers ever taken the time to research where Abraham was born? Or even Google it? Just take a moment and Google it with me now. I promise that this will be quick. Where was Abraham born? Well, I'll be damned. Look at that. Abraham was born in the city of Ur, and he was raised there. And what is Ur? A Sumerian city. So it stands to reason, when he became a man and eventually moved to Judea, he brought all the Sumerian stories right along with him. You know, the stories revolving around Anu and Lil, Enki, and the rest of the Sumerian pantheon. The stories that I've been talking about on this show since episode 1. And undoubtedly, he retold them the same way that he had originally heard them. I mean, why would he change it? He had grown up hearing his elders and the people he admired and looked up to tell these same stories. There was nothing wrong with them, They were historical facts as far as he was concerned, and I'm sure that it stayed that way for many years, until, of course, the Babylonians conquered Israel and Marduk rewrote them. The same being who said those famous words, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," the same being who renamed his own planet from Nibiru to Marduk, probably the absolute greatest example of narcissistic behavior in history. Can there be any doubt that this Anunnaki being would not rewrite the Jewish religious texts to exclude all the other gods of history and revolve solely around him? I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that is exactly what he did. And I am leaving out a lot of information leading up to the conquering of Judea by the Babylonians that will completely solidify my case against Marduk. I have only scratched the surface of the information regarding this being, Marduk, known by the Egyptians as Amun-Ra. I will expose more and more and more of his deeds under various different names as time goes on. But for now, let's return to the atrocities he committed as Amun-Ra in Egypt. Adhering to the vicious nature of warfare displayed by the Egyptians in Amun-Ra's name,
You bastard!
even the pharaoh Pi-Anki, who sent troops from Upper Egypt into the rebellious Lower Egypt, promised destruction forever, that he would ruin everything that remained, and that my father Amun-Ra praises me. And the list of atrocities goes on and on. Indeed, it seems that the only God who could stand toe-to-toe with Amun-Ra, nay, even defeat him during that time period, was the God of Israel. Now, I should clarify here that this all happened way before Marduk and the Babylonians conquered Israel. I know I'm skipping around a lot here, but just bear with me. In the words of the prophet Jeremiah, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I will punish Amun, god of Thebes, and those who trust in him, and shall bring retribution upon Egypt and its gods, its pharaohs, and its kings." From the Bible, we learn that this was an ongoing confrontation. Nearly 1,000 years earlier, in the days of the Exodus, Yahweh, the God of Israel at that time, smote Egypt with a series of afflictions intended to not only soften the heart of its ruler, but also as a judgment against all the gods of Egypt. But who was this version of Yahweh, this Anunnaki who dared to stand against Marduk Amun-Ra? You see, Yahweh was the Jewish term for their God, or God in general. In the Adam and Eve story, Yahweh was Enlil, as I've already proven. But at this point in time, Yahweh is now none other than Enki, Marduk's father.
What?
Oh yes, I've told you many times that when it came to the governance of land and the humans, there was no love lost between the Anunnaki. When the rebellious son got out of hand, it was his own father who had to step in and spank his bottom. Of course, Marduk only got stronger over time, and as I stated earlier, eventually conquered Enki and Israel as the god of the Babylonians in 587 BC. But for now, Enki had the upper hand, and we have all heard the story of the events leading up to the Exodus, of the Jews being led out of Egypt by Yahweh Enki. Yahweh Enki parts the waters so that the Israelites can pass through. Now, whether or not it was the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, which is a point that has been hotly debated, it's really irrelevant, because years earlier he had been the Sumerian god of water, after all. Parting waters was no problem for Enki. Then, when the Egyptian chariots gave chase, the waters receded and all the soldiers were drowned. So that round went to Enki, But were there ever times when Marduk/Amun-Ra actually took to the battlefield? Well, a later pharaoh, Ramses II, described a situation that resulted in the miraculous appearance of Amun-Ra Marduk fighting at his side during a decisive battle with the Hittites in 1286 BC. In this particular situation, the Egyptian army had reached Kadesh, ready for battle, but the Hittite army was nowhere to be found. So, Ramses ordered 2 of his divisions to advance towards the fortress, and as soon as they left, the Hittite chariots appeared as if out of nowhere and attacked the Egyptians from behind. The Egyptian troops fled in panic at this surprise attack, and it was then that Ramses realized that he was blocked off and surrounded by 2,500 Hittite chariots. And Ramses then yelled to his god, reminding him that he was in this predicament solely because he had followed Amun-Ra Marduk's orders. And he said, "What now, my father Amen? Has a father forgotten his son? Whatever I did or did not do, was it not in accordance with your commands? What are these Asiatics to you, O Amen, these wretches who know nothing of thee, O God? Are your powers not greater than millions of foot soldiers, of hundreds of thousands of chariot soldiers?" And then it happened. Marduk appeared on the battlefield, calling out, "Forward, forward! Ramses, beloved of Aman, I am with thee." The pair tore into the opposing troops, who were suddenly and inexplicably feebled. The Hittite soldiers dropped their hands to their sides, all at once, unable to shoot their arrows or raise their spears. And they called out to one another, "This is no mortal who is among us. This is a mighty God. His deeds are not the deeds of a man." And just like that, the enemy was slain, and Ramses managed to escape. And that is where I will leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I'm Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If so, please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. And also, tell your friends and help spread the word about this show. Also, if you have any questions regarding the content discussed on this program, just message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. I also wish to remind everyone that listening to this podcast is no excuse to not read the book that we are discussing here, The Wars of Gods and Men by Zecharia Sitchin. It is an amazing work, and I'm leaving out much information in order to keep the podcast flowing properly. So do yourselves a favor and read the book. Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth is written and produced by me, Mad Mark. All media used in this episode is done so under the protection of fair use for the purpose of teaching. Today we have taken another step in our ongoing journey to find the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now. This has been Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to more of the mysteries that puzzle mankind.